This is the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
Well, welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast, the podcast where we look at our times through the lens of faith and leadership, character, and history. I really am glad you've joined me. We're living in important times, and I'm glad you gather with me from time to time to talk about what's going on, what it means, and how to live in it. I want to say real quickly before I dive into my topic for this episode that we are looking for sponsors for the Stephen Mansfield Podcast. We reach a lot of people, powerful people, people in government, people in business, people in decisive roles. And if you'd like to help us with what we do, but also promote your company, your product, your mission, give us a call, check in with us. You can go to stephenmansfield.tv and contact us through that website. Let's dive in. In this episode, I want to talk about more of a way of thinking than I do about specific issues going on in our time. I've told you before that in this podcast, I don't want to just bounce off the news cycle with my hair on fire, giving my commentary. You have a lot of people doing that, and that doesn't serve you best. What serves you best is if I do exactly what we say in our opener, and that is talk about faith and leadership, character and history, and use those forces, use those insights to reflect on our times. One of the principles that guides my thinking about almost everything is actually drawn from a scripture. It's Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 18. One of my favorite books of the Bible is Ecclesiastes. I know it's a downer for a lot of people, but I find great wisdom in it. And in the New International Version of the Bible, the New International Translation, it says, "The man who fears God avoids all extremes." Other versions say the wise man avoids all extremes, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a context to it, but it doesn't change the fundamental meaning that the man who fears God, the wise man, the man who wants to live a superior life and think in superior ways, avoids all extremes. And this scripture, these words are a guide to me. Now, I don't take them to some extreme. That would be silly, wouldn't it, to take words about, cautions about extremes to extreme? Obviously, there are moments to be extreme. When your house is on fire, you want to be extreme about getting everybody out. You want to be extreme about dumping water on the fire. There are moments for extremes. There are moments to go all out and fully passionate. However, when it comes to what I do in life, when it comes to what we talk about on this podcast, to be extreme, to think only in extremes is destructive. And we are living in an age which increasingly only thinks in terms of extremes, extreme views. Person A has to be completely evil and the Antichrist. Person B has to be fantastic and awesome and tremendous and persecuted and misunderstood and holy. There's no nuance. There's no overlapping gray area. There's no, well, this is a good person, but they've got some flaws. And this person over here messed up on that thing and they're wrong about a certain matter, but still they've got some virtues. No, there's no nuance. There's no, as I say, gray area. There's no mixture. There's no ability to keep two competing thoughts in our brain at the same time. And this is affecting our times. In fact, it's actually fed by a lot of what goes on social media. We all know this, but let me give you a feature of social media. I have been right of center, sort of moderate, my whole life, my whole adult life politically. And as I gained a little bit of prominence for my books and my speeches and media appearances and so on, I had people come to me and say, you could make a whole lot more money if you would move extreme right. They would literally say that to me. We know you're conservative. We know you're right of center, but that's not where the money is. That's not where you get attention. If you would go extreme right, then you would have more power, you would have more visibility, you'd be more controversial, and therefore you would make more money. Literally, publicists and political consultants would come to me and say that. Now think about that. That means that I am not to stay with my moderate ideas, my right of center ideas. No. If I'll go hardcore extreme, I'll make more money. And I got to tell you, I see people doing this all the time. in our public life and on the American public stage. People I know don't really 100% believe what they're saying, but they know it's going to increase the attendance at their next rally. I fully believe this is what Donald Trump does. I don't believe that Donald Trump is a stupid man. I don't believe that he believes everything he's saying when he says it. But I believe he can pull a crowd. I believe that he can move people to run around with their hair on fire. I believe that he knows exactly how to get people motivated by talking in extreme terms, because that's the nature of our culture. And it moves people politically, and it incites the media, it excites X, it excites social media. It gets people stirred up. It gets people giving money. And that's why in my career, since I began to get a little bit of prominence as an author in my mid-30s, and I'm now in my mid-60s. So in the last 30 years, time and again, I've had people come and push me to the extreme, because that's where I would have more power, more of a hearing, make more money, move larger numbers of people. Think about that. Think about what that means for our society. And because I've been talked to in these terms and had long meetings about these things, I've refused it. I can tell when some of my friends who are famous people are talking in extreme terms. I can tell when politicians are doing it. I can tell when entire political parties are doing it. Now, all that to say that it might be cool and fun to do it for entertainment, but when it's brought into our American politics, it's extremely destructive. In fact, it's toxic. And let me give you an example of where extremes and an inability to think in nuance and an inability to hold competing thoughts in our brains at the same time are affecting policies that may actually ruin aspects of American public life. I'm finding this a great deal right now when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to Zelensky, when it comes to Russia, and when it comes to the Ukraine-Russian war. One of the shocks of my life is how conservatives in America today have moved pro-Russian. And not just lightly, not just saying, hey, maybe they're misunderstood. Hey, maybe Putin stumbled into this and didn't mean for this to happen. Hey, maybe we need to try some overtures. That's actually moderate thinking. What I've just described is moderate thinking. Sounds like something I would say. Oh, no, we have to have stunning extremes. So right now, for example, we've had the President of the United States describe Vladimir Zelensky as a dictator. Why? Well, I've talked about this before in this podcast, because he suspended elections as the Constitution requires him to do. I've told you this before. Let me summarize it for those of you who weren't with us then. The Ukrainian Constitution requires martial law during times of war, and because the government has declared martial law and elections can't be held fairly, it has also requires suspending elections. So Vladimir Zelensky enforces the Constitution and does not allow elections. This has caused people to say he's a dictator. He has also suspended certain political parties, banned them. Well, in their context, not like ours in the U.S. where we only have two political parties, basically. In Ukraine, you have many political parties, and some of them are Russian. So you're at war with Russia, and what you end up doing then is you ban these Russian political parties because you can't have them working against you from within the country. This all has caused the President of the United States and all of those who echo his opinions to call Zelensky a dictator. What's added to that is the fact that Zelensky, a very wealthy man, owns a nice house, keeps money out of the country, etc. This, of course, makes him an oligarch. This, of course, makes him a thief. This means he's stealing American tax money. There is no evidence for that whatsoever. He's just wealthy, right? He owned one of the most popular television shows and acted in that television show, by the way, having written it, in Europe, in all of Europe. And so this is like me owning and acting in Game of Thrones. If I had written Game of Thrones, acted in it, and owned it, I'd be an incredibly wealthy man. Same thing if I owned, acted in, and had written West Wing, for example, the popular TV show. I'd be a very, very wealthy man. Well, if I became president of the United States and I had very nice houses and money offshore and so on, then people would accuse me of stealing money from the American taxpayers. Not true. Not true. Not true. Not true. Not true. Then there are videos online of Ukrainian soldiers and police forcing some people into basically police vans, arresting them. And we're told in social media that this is Zelensky forcing people into the military. Again, not true. In the same way that we arrested draft dodgers in the U.S. in the late 1960s and early 1970s, that's what's going on in Ukraine. There are people who have dodged the draft. There are people who avoid military service at a time when the country is at war. Am I saying that all of those arrests are peaceful and gentle and polite? No, they look very violent on video, but it is not Zelensky pulling people off the street and forcing them into the military. Something, by the way, that does happen in Russia. I could go on and on and on. Let me give you another example of extreme thinking, extreme weird thinking. Tulsi Gabbard, who is our senior intelligence head in the United States government, said in the last few weeks that Europe is more of a threat to the United States than to Russia. Europe is more of a threat to the United States than to Russia. Now, I like Tulsi Gabbard. I think she's a good appointment for somewhere in the Trump administration. I've liked what she has done. I've liked her migration from the Democrat Party to the Republican Party. I think she's an articulate, gifted woman. I like that she serves in the military. I even like that she's Hawaiian. But that statement is silly. Again, extremism. Let's not just look at both sides as flawed and both sides needing to be brought to peace negotiations and both sides having excesses and having contributed to this war. No. No, instead, we've got to believe that Europe is more of a threat to the United States than Russia. Russia, which has intruded into our elections. Russia, which has nuclear missiles trained on us. Europe does not. Russia, which has killed, Vladimir Putin has killed his political opponents, etc. I could go on and on and on and on. But no, this is what we have to be told. So I'm going after a way of thinking in this podcast more than anything else. I want you to watch the extremes. I want you to watch the extremes in your own thinking, watch the extremes in our politics. Isn't it possible that Vladimir Putin, as he became the premier of Russia, that he decided he wanted to expand Russian influence? And he began to encroach in former Russian republics and began to pick a fight with Ukraine. Isn't it possible then, in response to that NATO tightened up, began to move eastward when they had said they wouldn't, but Putin's actions required it? That Putin then picked a fight with Ukraine because part of it was that he was concerned about NATO, Ukraine becoming a NATO country. And by the way, he believes that Ukraine is a spiritual font for a neo-Russian empire. And isn't it possible then that NATO moved further east and tightened up and the United States got involved? And then out of fear, perhaps, Putin invaded Ukraine. And Ukraine, spending 10% of what Russia spends on its military and having 10% the size of military, looked to NATO forces to come in and help, particularly the United States. And isn't it possible we have a war that's gone out of control, that could easily become nuclear, that has cost 1 million lives, that is devastating civilian populations? Ukraine will be rebuilding for a generation. Does Zelensky have to be evil? Does Ukraine have to be evil? Does Zelensky have to be a dictator, an evil man, a thief, a man who should be charged with war crimes? Is that really what we should be thinking? Does Putin have to be a Christian warrior beloved by Tucker Carlson? You understand what I'm saying? Can't we hold two competing thoughts in our mind at the same time? Again, Ecclesiastes 7:18, the man who fears God avoids extremes. And we live in an age of extremes. The man I admire at this moment, who seems to be fairly balanced in his thinking, is Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State. He articulates the idea of diplomacy well. He's willing to speak critically of his own boss. He's willing to see Zelensky in balanced terms. I'm very glad he's there. He's a man of faith who knows the scripture, Ecclesiastes 7:18, the man who fears God avoids all extremes. I don't know how forefront of mind it is, but I like the way he's talking. I like the way he's leading. I like the way he's negotiating. I like that he's criticized Zelensky, but he's also defended Zelensky. That seems to be the way it is in this world. I'm crazy about my wife, Beverly. Do I think she's perfect and angelic? No. She's a sinner like I am. We're all flawed. We're all a little nuts. We love each other despite our damage. That's what makes a great marriage. But in our public policy, especially with this administration, with Mr. Trump being a man who speaks in extremes, we are talking about extremes that are going to destroy us, because here's what's likely to happen. The United States is actually conducting peace negotiations with Russia unilaterally. In other words, the U.S. and Russia making decisions about what should happen for the conclusion of hostilities between Ukraine and Russia. Zelensky's not there. Ukraine is not there. What kind of peace is this going to be? We are setting a direction for American foreign policy that could not have been scripted better by Russia and Vladimir Putin. Now think about that. It wasn't that long ago we thought of Vladimir Putin as an evil man. What has happened? Well, conservative media has whitewashed him. Trump is enamored of him. And we are betraying an ally, Vladimir Zelensky, and a people who were invaded. Why? Because we are not heeding the wisdom of avoiding all extremes. We are giving ourselves to extremes. Putin's got to be ideal. Zelensky's got to be evil. That's how we have to go. Russia's got to be less of a threat than Europe, Tulsi Gabbard tells us. To the United States, my friends, it's insanity. And it's destroying alliances and policies that we've had for generations, because we can't seem to be balanced in our thinking, and because we know what whips up a crowd. Let's be wiser. Let's be smarter. And for those of you in various kinds of leadership listening to this podcast, be aware that extremes are things you sacrifice yourself on. Extremes may get attention, may gain money, may even allow you to rise. But ultimately, you will sacrifice yourself on the sharp points of your extremes. We are about to do that in American foreign policy.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator in international media. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.